A loner cowboy saved a baby from a river at sunrise. 500 riders arrived holding her blanket, the ghost of the rich. The morning mist clung to Red Rock Canyon like a shroud, and Wyatt Briggs preferred it that way. In the pre-dawn darkness, he moved through the landscape like the specter folks claimed he was, silent, solitary, and beholden to no one. His weathered hands worked the leather reins with practiced ease as his horse, Dust, picked their way down the treacherous canyon path toward the river. Wyatt had been riding these lands for 7 years now, ever since he'd needed to disappear. The locals in the settlement 20 miles east called him the Ghost of the Ridge, and he'd done nothing to discourage the name. It kept people away, and that suited him just fine. The sky was beginning to bleed purple at the edges when Dust suddenly stopped, ears pricked forward. Wyatt's hand instinctively moved to his Colt .45, but the horse wasn't showing signs of danger, just curiosity. "What is it, boy?" Wyatt's voice came out rough from disuse. Sometimes he went weeks without speaking to another soul. Then he heard it, a sound so faint it might have been the wind, except the morning air was still as death. He dismounted, boots crunching on frost-hardened earth, and followed Dust's gaze toward the riverbank. The Bent River ran fast this time of year, swollen with snowmelt from the mountains. In the growing light, Wyatt saw something that made his blood run cold. A wicker basket, caught between two rocks, tipping dangerously as the current pulled at it. He might have dismissed it as debris, except for the tiny hand that emerged from within, fingers splayed against the dawn. Wyatt didn't remember running. One moment he was on the bank, the next he was waist-deep in water so cold it stole his breath. The current fought him, trying to claim both him and the basket, but Wyatt Briggs hadn't survived this long by giving up easily. His fingers closed around the wicker handle just as the basket began to tip. Inside, wrapped in a sodden blue blanket embroidered with strange symbols, lay a baby girl. Her skin was as pale as winter moonlight, her lips were tinged blue, and she wasn't crying, wasn't moving. No, no, no. Wyatt pulled her against his chest, stumbling back toward shore. The blanket was heavy with river water, but he didn't dare unwrap her yet. Back at his campsite, hands that could shoot a silver dollar at 50 paces shook as he laid the infant near the fire. She was so small, so still. Wyatt had delivered calves and foals and had even helped a traveling woman birth her baby 5 years back. But this was different. He peeled away the wet blanket carefully, revealing a child maybe 6 months old, dressed in a white gown that might have been fine once but was now stained with mud and riverweed. Around her neck hung a peculiar pendant, a silver star within a circle, with markings he couldn't read. "Come on, little one," he whispered, rubbing her tiny chest with his calloused thumb. "Don't you give up now." A cough, barely more than a hiccup, and suddenly she was breathing, crying weakly. The sound was the most beautiful thing Wyatt had heard in 7 years of silence. He wrapped her in his own coat, the leather still warm from his body, and held her close. His coffee pot held water he'd boiled earlier. He cooled some in a tin cup and carefully dripped it between her lips. She swallowed, coughed, and swallowed again. "That's it," he found himself saying. "That's my girl." The words surprised him. My girl. He hadn't claimed anything as his own since. The baby's eyes opened, startling blue, like the blanket she'd been wrapped in, like the sky just before a storm. She looked at him with the peculiar intensity of infants, as if she could see straight through to whatever was left of his soul. "Where did you come from?" he asked softly. The pendant caught the firelight, and he studied it closer. The markings weren't English, weren't Spanish, or any Indian symbols he knew. The silver was fine quality, the kind of work you'd see in Santa Fe or even back east. She began to cry in earnest now, the healthy wail of a hungry baby. Wyatt had some canned milk in his saddlebags, kept for coffee. He watered it down, warmed it carefully, and fashioned a makeshift bottle from a leather water flask with a small hole cut in the cap. She drank greedily, tiny fingers wrapping around his thick index finger. When she finished, she didn't let go. "You're not alone anymore," Wyatt heard himself whisper. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere he'd locked away 7 years ago with everything else that hurt too much to remember. As the sun climbed higher, painting the canyon walls gold and crimson, Wyatt sat with his back against a boulder, the baby sleeping against his chest. He should take her to town and find someone who knew about babies, about pendants, and about strange blankets. Should find her a proper home with a proper family. But every time he started to move, she'd make a small sound and burrow deeper into his coat, and he'd find himself sitting back down. The blue blanket lay drying on a rock, and in the full daylight, Wyatt could see it better. The embroidery wasn't random. It was a map of sorts, showing mountains and rivers, paths and symbols. At the center was the same design as her pendant, a star within a circle. He was studying it when dust whinnied sharply. Wyatt's free hand found his gun as he scanned the ridgeline. Nothing moved, but the horse was agitated, dancing in place. Then he saw them, riders on the eastern ridge, silhouetted against the morning sky. One, then three, then a dozen. They weren't moving, just watching. Wyatt stood slowly, the baby still cradled in one arm. More riders appeared on the western ridge than on the north. By the time the sun was fully up, he counted at least 50, positioned all around the canyon, but making no move to approach. "Easy," he said, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to dust, the baby, or himself. The riders remained motionless as statues. Then, as if by some silent signal, they began to descend, not charging, not threatening, but moving with the deliberate pace of a funeral procession. As they drew closer, Wyatt saw something that made his heart skip. Each rider carried something blue. Scraps of fabric, some no bigger than a handkerchief. Some carried larger pieces, blankets, shawls, and flags. All the same distinctive blue as the baby's blanket, many bearing similar strange symbols. The lead rider, a woman with silver-streaked hair wearing a long blue cloak, stopped 30 feet away. She dismounted slowly, and Wyatt saw tears streaming down her weathered face. "The child," she said, her accent unlike any Wyatt had heard. "She lives?" Wyatt nodded, instinctively holding the baby tighter. "Found her in the river. She's cold and hungry, but she's breathing." The woman took a step forward, then stopped when Wyatt tensed. "I am Miriam," she said softly. "We are the riders of the blue thread. We have been searching. So long we have been searching." "Is she yours?" Wyatt asked, though something in his chest tightened at the thought of handing her over. Miriam shook her head. "She belongs to all of us. And to none of us." She gestured to the gathering riders. "We are what remains of a people scattered by war, by hatred, by fear. The child, she is our hope. The last of a bloodline that was meant to unite us." More riders were arriving now, flowing into the canyon like water finding its level. 100, 200 more, each carrying their piece of blue fabric like a holy relic. "I don't understand," Wyatt said. "Her mother died bringing her to safety," Miriam explained. "Sent her down the river rather than let her be taken by those who would use her for power. We have been following the river for 3 days, searching." She pulled something from her cloak, another piece of blue fabric, this one sewn with gold thread. This was her mother's. "Each of us carries a piece of the great tapestry that was torn apart when our people fled. The child, she was to be the thread that wove us back together." The baby stirred in Wyatt's arms, making a small sound of contentment. He looked down at her peaceful face, then at the hundreds of riders now filling the canyon, all watching him with desperate hope. "What's her name?" he asked. "She has none yet," Miriam said. "Tradition says she cannot be named until she finds her guardian. The one who pulls her from the water of trials. They earn the right to." She stopped, eyes widening as she truly looked at Wyatt for the first time. "You're alone," she breathed. "No family mark, no clan colors. You're nobody," Wyatt finished. "Just a ghost passing through." But Miriam was smiling now, tears fresh on her cheeks. "No," she said. "Not nobody. You are the unbound one." The prophecy spoke of this, that she would be saved by one who belonged to no people, claimed by no blood. Only such a one could be trusted to raise her without bias, without the old hatreds. Wyatt wanted to laugh. Prophecy? Guardian? He was just a broken man hiding from his past, no fit keeper for anyone, let alone a baby wrapped in legend. But the infant chose that moment to open her eyes, looking up at him with that penetrating blue gaze, and his protest died unspoken. Her tiny hand was still wrapped around his finger, holding on like he was the only solid thing in the world. "I don't know anything about raising a child," he said roughly. "You know about being alone," Miriam said gently. "You know about survival, about protecting what matters. The rest, we will teach you." As if it were a signal, the riders began to dismount. They approached slowly, reverently, each laying their piece of blue fabric at Wyatt's feet. Some were crying. Some whispered in their strange language. All looked at the baby with a mixture of joy and sorrow, hope and fear. By the time the sun reached its zenith, 500 riders had gathered in Red Rock Canyon. 500 pieces of blue fabric lay in a circle around Wyatt and the child, like petals of some impossible flower. And Wyatt Briggs, the ghost of the ridge, the man who belonged nowhere and to no one, found himself at the center of something larger than he could comprehend, holding a baby whose weight felt like the whole world in his arms. "What happens now?" he asked Miriam. She smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. "Now? Now you learn what it means to be a father. And we learn what it means to hope again." As the riders began to set up camp around him, as the baby gurgled contentedly against his chest, as the blue fabric fluttered in the afternoon breeze like 1,000 prayers, Wyatt realized his days of being a ghost were over. He had been found. The naming. The first week nearly broke him. Wyatt had thought himself prepared for anything the frontier could throw at him: blizzards, droughts, rattlesnakes, claim jumpers. But nothing had prepared him for the complete helplessness of trying to comfort a baby at 3 in the morning when she wouldn't stop crying. "Come on, little one," he pleaded, walking his dozenth circuit around the fire. "I fed you, changed you, sang every damn song I know. What else do you want from me? Perhaps this would help?" Miriam appeared from the shadows, holding a small leather pouch. In the days since the riders had made camp in the canyon, she'd become his most frequent visitor, though she was careful never to presume. "What is it?" Wyatt asked wearily. "Herbs from the homeland. My mother used them when I was fractious as a baby. She sprinkled some into boiling water, and soon a sweet, calming scent filled the air. Hold her close and let her breathe it in." Miraculously, the baby's cries softened to whimpers, then silence. She nestled against Wyatt's chest, finally peaceful. "Thank you," he said, meaning it deeply. Miriam settled on a log across from him. "You're doing better than you think, Wyatt Briggs." "Am I?" He looked down at the sleeping infant. "I keep waiting for someone to realize I'm the wrong man for this. That you've made a mistake." "The water doesn't make mistakes," Miriam said simply. "It brought her to you." Over the following days, Wyatt learned more about the people who had filled his silent canyon with life. They called themselves the Kith of the Blue Thread, descendants of a civilization that had flourished in the mountains of Eastern Europe before being scattered by war. Each family had saved a piece of their great tapestry, a work of art that had supposedly taken 100 years to complete, containing the history and wisdom of their people in its woven patterns. "When the persecution came," explained Jacob, an elderly rider with kind eyes, "we knew we had to flee. But we also knew that together, we were too visible, too easy a target. So the tapestry was divided, each family taking their piece and scattering to the winds. And the baby? Wyatt asked, watching her sleep in the cradle the riders had built from willow branches. She is the daughter of our last queen, Jacob said softly. Her mother was murdered by those who wanted to use the child's bloodline to claim power over our scattered people. Rather than let her be taken, her guardian sent her down the river with a prayer that the water would carry her to safety. And it carried her to me. Wyatt shook his head. A killer hiding from his past. Some safety. Jacob studied him for a long moment. What did you kill for, Wyatt Briggs? The question caught him off guard. In 7 years, no one had asked him directly about his past. He'd worn his silence like armor, and folks had learned not to probe. He stopped, surprised to find he wanted to answer. Maybe it was the old man's gentle eyes, or maybe it was the weight of the trust they'd placed in him. I killed to protect my wife. Killed the 3 men who took her from me anyway. Shot them down in the street like dogs, and I'd do it again. And then I ran. Couldn't stay in a place where every corner held her memory. Couldn't face her grave. So I became nobody. A ghost. Jacob nodded slowly. A man who understands loss. Who knows the weight of protecting what you love. Yes, I think the water chose well. As the days passed, the riders transformed the canyon into a small city. Tents and wagons formed neat circles. Cooking fires sent up spirals of smoke, and the sound of their strange, beautiful music echoed off the red rocks each evening. They were careful not to crowd Wyatt, maintaining a respectful distance from his camp while making it clear he was welcome among them. The baby thrived under their collective care. Women who had raised a dozen children taught Wyatt how to tell her different cries apart: hunger, discomfort, loneliness, simple baby grumpiness. Men who looked like they could wrestle bears showed him gentle ways to help her sleep, old lullabies in the old tongue that seemed to calm her instantly. She needs a name, Miriam said one evening as Wyatt fed the baby her bottle. It's been 2 weeks. Tradition says, I know what tradition says, Wyatt interrupted. I'm supposed to name her. But how can I? I don't even know who I am anymore, let alone who she's supposed to be. Perhaps, suggested Samuel, a younger rider who'd become something of a friend. That's exactly why you're the right person to name her. You're not bound by our expectations, our history. You can see her for who she is, not who we need her to be. That night, Wyatt sat alone with the baby on a ledge overlooking the canyon. The riders' campfires sparkled below like earthbound stars, and the actual stars wheeled overhead in the clear desert sky. The baby was awake, her blue eyes reflecting the heavens as she gazed up at him with that unnerving infant intensity. What do you think, little one? He asked softly. What should we call you? Something from their language that I'll butcher every time I say it? Something proper and queenly. She gurgled and reached for his face. Her tiny fingers found the week-old beard he'd been too distracted to shave, and she tugged with surprising strength. Ow, he laughed, the sound surprising him. When was the last time he'd laughed? You're a fighter, aren't you? Pulled from a river and ready to take on the world. The memory hit him suddenly like a flash flood. His wife, Sarah, standing in their kitchen with flour in her hair, laughing as she told him about the daughter she hoped they'd have someday. I want to name her after my grandmother, she'd said. Hope. Because that's what children are, isn't it? Hope that tomorrow will be better than today. The baby made a contented sound, settling against his chest as if she belonged there. Hope, Wyatt whispered, testing the word. It felt rusty in his mouth and used for so long. But right. How does that sound? Hope Briggs. My wife would have. She would have loved you. A warmth spread through the canyon that had nothing to do with the fires below. The baby, Hope, yawned enormously and closed her eyes, one tiny fist clutching his shirt. When Wyatt returned to camp, he found Miriam waiting. You've chosen, she said. It wasn't a question. Hope, he said simply. Her name is Hope. Miriam's eyes filled with tears. In our tongue, the word for hope is Nadezhda. It was the name of our first queen, she who began the great tapestry. She smiled through her tears. The circle closes and begins again. Word spread through the camp like wildfire. Within minutes, riders were gathering, forming a great circle with Wyatt and Hope at its center. They began to sing not the mournful ballads he'd heard before, but something joyful, triumphant. "What are they saying?" Wyatt asked. "They sing of the child named Hope." Miriam translated, "daughter of sorrow, pulled from the water, given to the lonely man who will teach her that family is not just blood, but choice. They sing of the thread that will weave us together again, not as we were, but as we might become." As the song swelled, riders began bringing forth their pieces of the tapestry. Under Miriam's direction, they laid them out, showing Wyatt how they fit together like a vast puzzle. Even incomplete, many pieces lost in their long exile, the tapestry was breathtaking. It showed mountains and valleys, cities and forests, and throughout it all, a blue thread that connected everything, weaving through every scene, binding the whole together. "The blue thread represents our people," Miriam explained. "No matter how far we scatter, we remain connected. And now, hope is that thread reborn, not to drag us back to the past, but to weave us into something new." "I still don't understand why me," Wyatt said, overwhelmed by the weight of their expectations. "Look closer," Jacob said, pointing to a section of the tapestry. "See there?" The prophecy wasn't added later. It was woven into the very beginning. Wyatt knelt, hope secure in one arm, and studied where Jacob pointed. There, in threads so fine he had to squint to see them, was an image that made his breath catch. A lone figure pulling a child from water, surrounded by riders carrying blue. And the figure had no face, no identifying marks. It could have been anyone. "The unbound guardian," Jacob said softly. "One who belongs to no people, carries no history, and bears no obligations to the past. Only such a one can raise the child to see all people as her people, all places as her home." "You want me to raise her to be your queen," Wyatt said. "No," Miriam corrected gently. "We want you to raise her to be Hope. What she chooses to become, that will be her decision when she's old enough to make it. Our prophecy brought her to you. What happens next is between you and her." That night, the riders celebrated as they hadn't in years. Music filled the canyon, stories were shared in a dozen languages, and food appeared from wagons in quantities that seemed impossible. Through it all, Wyatt sat by his fire with Hope sleeping in his arms, watching the joy he'd somehow brought to these people simply by pulling a baby from a river. "You're going to have quite a story to tell when you're older," he murmured to Hope. "Found in a river, named by a ghost, destined to be whatever you damn well choose to be, I suppose." Samuel approached with a plate of food and a question in his eyes. Wyatt nodded, and the younger man sat beside him. "You're thinking of leaving," Samuel said. "How did you know?" "It's what I would be thinking. All these people, these expectations. It's not what you signed up for when you decided to be alone." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. "Part of me wants to saddle dust right now and ride out. Find some other canyon where it's just me and her and the silence. But," he looked down at Hope's peaceful face, "but she deserves to know where she comes from, to have the choice I never had, to belong to something bigger than herself." He met Samuel's eyes. "I won't raise her to be your queen, but I won't deny her the chance to know her people either." Samuel smiled. "That's all we can ask." As the celebration continued around them, Wyatt made his decision. He would stay for now. Not forever, he was still too much a ghost for that, but long enough to learn what Hope needed to know, to give her roots even as he taught her to ride free. "You've got yourself a complicated life ahead, Hope Briggs," he whispered. "But then again, the best things usually are complicated." In the distance, a coyote howled, and for once, it didn't sound lonely. It sounded like it was calling to its pack, and in the answering howls that echoed across the desert, Wyatt heard something he'd forgotten existed. The sound of coming home. The rising. 6 months later, the canyon had become a world unto itself, Where once Wyatt had known every shadow and silence of the place, now it thrummed with life. The riders had built semi-permanent structures, not quite settling, but no longer ready to flee at a moment's notice. Gardens grew in terraced plots carved into the hillsides. Children who had known only life on the run played freely among the red rocks. And at the center of it all, hope. She was crawling now, pulling herself across the worn rug in Wyatt's tent with determination that reminded him daily of her will to survive. Her blue eyes had lightened to the color of the winter sky, and her hair was coming in dark, as her mother's must have been. She was beautiful, clever, and absolutely fearless, a combination that kept Wyatt in a constant state of vigilance. "No, Hope, that's not food," he said for the dozenth time that morning, pulling a particularly interesting rock from her mouth. She gave him a look of profound betrayal and immediately began searching for something else to taste. "She's going to be trouble," Miriam observed from the tent entrance, smiling at the sight of the massive former gunslinger on his hands and knees, chasing after a baby. "Going to be?" Wyatt snorted. "She already is. Yesterday, she figured out how to escape from the cradle. Found her halfway to the horse paddock. Following in your footsteps already. The escape artist." Wyatt's smile faded slightly. "They've been traveling this road for weeks now," Miriam and the other elders gently suggesting it was time to think about the future. About permanence. About what would happen when Hope was old enough to need more than just a canyon full of refugees and a reluctant father. "There's a town," Miriam continued, settling herself on a cushion. 30 miles north. Cedar Falls. Good people, they say. School. Church. The things a child needs. The things that get people killed," Wyatt countered, scooping Hope up as she made another break for freedom. "Towns mean recognition. Mean laws and questions and life," Miriam interrupted gently. "You can't keep her in this canyon forever, Wyatt. She needs other children, education, and a chance to be normal." "Normal?" Wyatt laughed bitterly. "She's the maybe queen of a scattered people, found in a river, raised by a killer. What part of that suggests normal to you?" Hope, perhaps sensing the tension, began to fuss. Without thinking, Wyatt began humming the rider's lullaby he'd learned, swaying gently. She settled immediately, content in his arms. "That part," Miriam said softly. "The part where she's just a little girl who loves her papa." The word hit Wyatt like a physical blow. Papa. He'd been so careful not to think of himself that way, to maintain some distance. But watching Hope's eyes drift closed, feeling her complete trust as she relaxed against his chest, he knew the battle was already lost. He had been lost the moment he'd pulled her from that river. "I'll think about it," he said roughly. But thinking became impossible when the riders on watch began calling out in alarm. Wyatt was on his feet instantly, Hope secured in one arm, his gun hand free. Through the tent flap, he could see riders running, not in panic but with purpose. The watcher's signals meant only one thing: strangers approaching. "How many?" he asked Thomas, one of the watch captains. 12 riders. Moving fast from the east. They're not trying to hide. Lawmen? Can't tell yet. But Wyatt." Thomas's face was grim. "They're asking for you by name." Ice formed in Wyatt's stomach. 7 years of running, and it seemed his past had finally caught up. He handed Hope to Miriam, ignoring both the baby's protests and the woman's worried look. "Take her to the inner caves," he ordered. "If shooting starts, it won't come to that," Miriam said firmly. "You're not alone anymore, Wyatt Briggs. Remember that." But as Wyatt strapped on his guns and walked toward the canyon entrance, he felt very much alone. The ghost was surfacing, the killer he'd tried to bury under months of lullabies and diaper changes. The riders were waiting just beyond the canyon mouth. 11 men armed to the teeth and one woman who sat her horse with an authority that marked her as their leader. She was perhaps 40, with steel-gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Wyatt Briggs," she called out. "Also known as the widower of Tucson. The ghost of Red Ridge." The man who killed the Morrison brothers. Among other things, Wyatt replied evenly. You've come a long way to find a dead man, Marshal. She smiled thinly. Oh, I'm not a marshal, Mr. Briggs. My name is Catherine Morrison, sister to the men you gunned down in Tucson. Wyatt's hand hovered near his gun, but something in her manner stayed him. She wasn't here for a shootout, at least, not yet. They killed my wife, he said simply. Tortured her for 3 days while I was away. Left her for me to find. I know, Catherine said, and the pain in her voice was real. I know what my brothers were. What they did. I've spent 7 years learning about every life they destroyed, including your Saris. The sound of his wife's name after so long was like a knife between his ribs. Then you know why they had to die. I do. That's not why I'm here. She dismounted slowly, hands visible. I'm here because the man who helped my brothers, the one who pointed them toward your ranch, who told them about the gold you'd supposedly hidden, he's still out there. Still destroying lives. Nathaniel Cross, Wyatt breathed. The banker who'd wanted their land, who'd hired the Morrisons when Wyatt wouldn't sell. The same. Now calling himself Nathan Cromwell, he is running for territorial governor. Using blood money to buy respectability. She stepped closer. I want him brought to justice. Real justice. And I need the testimony of the one man whose word might still carry weight, the man he wronged most. I'm dead, Wyatt said flatly. Been dead 7 years. No testimony from a ghost. But you're not dead, are you? Catherine's eyes flicked toward the canyon. You're very much alive. With people to protect. People Cross would very much like to know about it if he learned you were here. The threat was subtle but clear. Wyatt felt the familiar rage building, the one that had sent him into the street that day in Tucson. But before he could respond, he heard something that changed everything. Hope was crying. Not the distant wail of a baby in the caves, but close. Too close. He turned to see Miriam approaching, Hope in her arms. Behind her came the riders, not armed for war, but present. Watching. Waiting. She wouldn't settle, Miriam said simply, handing the fussing baby to Wyatt. She wanted her papa. Hope immediately calmed in his arms, and Wyatt found himself facing Catherine Morrison while holding a baby. The absurdity of it might have been funny if the stakes weren't so high. Catherine's expression had changed entirely. My God, she whispered. She's yours. In every way that matters, Wyatt said. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know you had a child. I would never, she stopped, visibly collecting herself. This changes things. Does it? Catherine looked at Hope, then at the riders gathered behind them. Understanding dawned in her eyes. The blue thread, people. The ones the territory officials have been searching for. You're harboring them. They're harboring me, Wyatt corrected. And if you bring trouble to them, I won't. Catherine raised her hands. Mr. Briggs, Wyatt, I came here for justice, not more bloodshed. My brothers were monsters, but they were my blood. Their sins stain me too. I've spent 7 years trying to atone, to balance the scales. Stopping Cross is part of that. She reached into her saddlebag slowly, pulling out a leather folder. Territorial pardons. Signed and sealed. For you and any associates you might have. Full amnesty in exchange for testimony against Cross. The federal investigators have been building a case, but they need someone who was there. Someone whose story can't be dismissed. Wyatt looked at the papers, then at Hope, then at the riders, who had become his unlikely family. And if I refuse? Then I ride away and never speak of this place. But Cross becomes governor. And governors have resources. Eventually, he'll find you. Find them. Find her. Catherine's voice was gentle but firm. You can't protect her by hiding forever, Wyatt. Sometimes, you have to stand and fight in the light. As if in response, Hope reached up and patted his face with one chubby hand, babbling something that might have been Papa, but was probably just baby talk. Cedar Falls, Miriam said suddenly. The trial would be in Cedar Falls, yes? The territorial capital? Catherine nodded. 3 weeks from now. The very town we were discussing, Miriam murmured. Interesting how the threads weave together. Wyatt understood. This wasn't just about his past anymore. It was about Hope's future. About whether she'd grow up in hiding or have a chance at the normal life Miriam had spoken of. I need time to think, he said. One day, Catherine replied. We ride for Cedar Falls tomorrow, with or without you. That night, the canyon was quiet. The riders understood that this decision was Wyatt's alone to make, though their opinions were clear in their faces. They'd been running too long themselves not to understand the weight of choosing to stand and fight. Wyatt sat by his fire with Hope sleeping in her cradle beside him. The blue blanket she'd been found in was draped over the side, cleaned and mended by the rider's careful hands, waiting for the day she was old enough to understand its significance. What would you have done, Sarah? He asked the stars. Would you want me to hide forever? Or teach our daughter, because she is ours, no matter how she came to me, that some things are worth facing? The stars, as always, kept their counsel. But Hope stirred in her sleep, one small hand emerging from her blankets to grasp at the air. Without thinking, Wyatt offered his finger, and she held on tight. By morning, his decision was made. The ride to Cedar Falls took 4 days. Wyatt had expected to go alone, or perhaps with Catherine's escort. He hadn't expected the entire population of the canyon to pack up and follow. You think we'd let you face this alone? Samuel had laughed when Wyatt protested. You pulled our hope from the river. Where you go, we go. And so they went. 500 riders of the blue thread, moving openly across the territory for the first time in years. Families who had hidden their heritage, young people who had never seen their culture celebrated publicly, and elders who had thought to die in exile, all following a gunslinger and the baby he carried. Cedar Falls had never seen anything like it. The town of 3,000 suddenly found itself host to a small nation, one that set up camp with practiced efficiency on the outskirts and waited with patient dignity for their guardian to do what he'd come to do. The trial was a sensation. Nathaniel Cross, pillar of the community and gubernatorial candidate, was faced with the ghost he'd thought long buried. Wyatt testified simply, without emotion, laying out the facts that federal investigators had suspected but couldn't prove. Cross's involvement with the Morrison brothers, the murders he'd ordered, the lands he'd stolen. But it was what happened after his testimony that shook the territory. Mr. Briggs, the federal prosecutor asked, where have you been these 7 years? Running, Wyatt replied. Hiding. Trying to forget. And what changed? Why come forward now? Wyatt looked at the packed courtroom, at Cross's hate-filled face, and at Catherine Morrison sitting in the gallery with tears on her cheeks. Then he looked at the front row, where Miriam sat holding Hope. I found something worth protecting, he said simply. Someone worth showing that justice matters. That the past doesn't have to define the future. And who is that someone? Wyatt stood, walked to Miriam, and took Hope in his arms. She was awake, looking around the courtroom with bright curiosity. This is Hope Briggs, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. My daughter, found in a river, given to my keeping, teaching me every day that life goes on, that love goes on, that even a ghost can learn to live again. The courtroom erupted. Cross was screaming about lies and setups. His lawyers were objecting. The judge was banging his gavel. But in the middle of the chaos, Hope laughed, a bright, delighted sound that cut through the noise like sunshine through storm clouds. And one by one, people stopped shouting to look at the baby who found joy in the midst of such adult fury. The verdict, when it came, was never really in doubt. Cross would hang for his crimes. His network of corruption would be dismantled. The territory would have to find a new candidate for governor. But for Wyatt, standing outside the courthouse with Hope in his arms and the riders surrounding them, The verdict was almost incidental. What mattered was what came next. "So," Catherine Morrison said, approaching with her hand extended. "What now, Mr. Briggs? The ghost is well and truly buried. What does the living man do?" Wyatt shook her hand, surprised to find he bore her no ill will. "I suppose he raises his daughter, finds a place for his people, tries to deserve the second chance he's been given." In Cedar Falls, he looked around at the town that had witnessed his resurrection, at the mountains beyond where sanctuary had been found, at the riders who were already discussing which buildings might be for sale and which trades they could ply. "Why not?" he said. "Seems like as good a place as any to weave new threads." 6 months later, Cedar Falls had a new general store run by the Kozlov family, a bakery where Mrs. Chin sold pastries from 3 different traditions, and a school where children learned their letters in English and mathematics in the old tongue. The blue thread that had once connected a scattered people now wove through the life of a frontier town, making it richer and stranger and infinitely more interesting. And at the heart of it all, in a house on the edge of town with a view of the Red Canyon beyond, Wyatt Briggs raised his daughter. He taught her to ride and shoot and track, but also to weave and sing and remember. He told her stories of her 2 mothers, the one who bore her and sent her to safety, and the one who would have loved her had she lived. He showed her how to be strong and gentle, fierce and kind, rooted and free. On her first birthday, the riders held a ceremony. Each family brought their piece of the great tapestry, and under Miriam's guidance, they began the slow work of weaving them back together. Not as they had been, too much was lost for that, but as something new. Something that included threads of different colors and different patterns. American threads and Mexican threads, Indian threads and threads from places too far away to name. "It will take years," Miriam explained to Wyatt as they watched the weavers work. "Perhaps Hope's whole lifetime. But when it's done, it will tell a new story. Not just where we came from, but where we're going." "And where's that?" Wyatt asked, Hope toddling between them, chasing a butterfly with profound concentration. "Forward," Miriam said simply. "Always forward." As the sun set over Cedar Falls, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, Wyatt watched Hope catch her butterfly with gentle hands, examine it with wonder, then let it go. She turned to him with a smile that was pure Sarah, pure light, pure hope. "Papa," she called, her first clear word. "Papa, see." "I see, little one," he called back, his voice thick with emotions he'd thought long dead. "I see everything." And he did. He saw the threads that connected past to present to future. Saw how a man could die and be reborn. How people could be scattered and still remain whole. How a baby in a basket could carry the weight of prophecy and still be just a little girl who loved butterflies. Most of all, he saw how sometimes the water knows exactly where to carry us, even when we think we're drowning. The ghost of Red Rock Canyon was gone. In his place stood Wyatt Briggs, father, protector, and keeper of hope. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but as Hope ran to him on unsteady legs, shrieking with laughter as he caught her and swung her up into the air, he knew it was the life he was meant to live. The threads were weaving together, creating something beautiful and new. And at the center of it all, a little girl with sky-blue eyes was teaching a broken man how to be whole again, one day at a time. The water, as Miriam had said, never makes mistakes.